Adolf Hitler is one of the most popular and reviled figures in world history. He was born in 1889 to an Australian family and became a politician who was the dictator of Germany from 1933 until his suicide in 1945. Hitler got the title Fuhrer und Reichskanzler, which means leader. In 1933, after rising to power and during his dictatorship, he initiated the Second World War in Europe by invading Poland on the 1st of September 1939. Hitler was the leader of the Nazi Party, which fought against communist uprisings after the First World War in Germany and was closely involved in military operations throughout the war. In fact, Hitler was central to the perpetration of the Holocaust between 1941 and 1945 that resulted in the massacre of hundreds of Jews and other persons. Victims were deported by rail to extermination camps, where, if they survived the journey, most were killed with poison gas. Only a few Holocaust perpetrators faced criminal trials. Billions of dollars in reparation have been paid, and the Holocaust has also been commemorated in museums, memorials, and cultures. It has become central to Western historical consciousness as a symbol of ultimate human evil. The Nazis developed their ideology based on previous politics of racism and German colonization of Eastern Europe, and seized power in early 1933. Racial abuse was common during Hitler's reign, and this was clearly seen in the maltreatment of supposedly incorrigible offenders. Production for war became a yardstick through which the government's performance was measured. Local officials were also brutalized by the massive increase in the number of judicial death sentences carried out inside prisons and by the growing pressure of their jobs due to overcrowding and understaffing. More and more officials took out their frustrations on the prisoners. In Nazi Germany, Hitler promoted a program initiated by physicians to sterilize mentally ill and physically disabled persons. Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, born on December 18, 1878, in Gori, Georgia, and simply known as Stalin, was a Soviet politician, theorist, and revolutionary who led the Soviet Union from 1924 until his death in 1953. Stalin is widely considered to be one of the 20th century's most significant figures, with a persuasive personality cult within the international Marxist-Leninist movement, which revered him as a champion of the working class and socialism. He is known to have brought the Soviet Union to higher heights, transforming it to an industrial power, which could claim impressive achievements in urbanization, military strength, education, and Soviet pride. To eradicate enemies of the working class, Stalin instituted what was known as the Great Purge. In the Great Purge, over 1 million enemies were imprisoned in the Gulag system of forced labor camps, and at least 700,000 executed by government agents between 1936 and 1938. Seizure of land, famine, punishment of war prisoners, and war crimes were the order of the day during Stalin's reign in the USSR. It is worth noting that Hitler belonged to the Nationalist Party in Germany, while Stalin imposed a communist regime in Russia. Hitler and Stalin were ideological enemies but similar leaders. They genuinely believed that they were acting in accordance with immutable natural laws, to such an extent that they were willing to sacrifice the self-interest of their regimes for the sake of enacting those supposed laws. This is just a briefing that will make you better understand what we shall be talking about in today's video. You must have heard about the former King of Belgium, Leopold II, who set Belgium as a colonial power in Africa, and is well known for the widespread atrocities that were carried out under his rule. Leopold was born in Brussels in 1835 as the second but eldest surviving son of King Leopold I and Louise of Orleans. Leopold succeeded his father as king in 1865 and ruled for 44 years until his death. He is the longest-serving Belgian monarch to date. King Leopold II was the founder and sole owner of the Congo Free State, now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. Under his regime, millions of Congolese inhabitants, including children, were mutilated, killed, or died from disease and famine. Belgium may not be the first European country that most people think of when they hear the words blood-soaked colonial tyranny. The country has always been more famous for beer than epic crimes against humanity, and that is why today, King Leopold II of Belgium, who was a tyrant, is not as reviled as Hitler and Stalin. Just keep watching as we tell you this whole story. Make sure you are comfortable enough while watching, and reserve your opinions for the comment section. It is alleged that while reigning as the autocratic ruler of the Congo Free State from 1885 to 1908, King Leopold may have killed as many as 15 million people. At the peak of European imperialism in Africa, he ran a personal empire so vast and cruel that rivaled and even exceeded the crimes of even the worst dictators of the 20th century. This empire we are talking about is the Congo Free State. King Leopold was an absolute slave master to the people of this Congolese empire for more than 30 years, rather than being a regular colonialist of the European government. Here's what happened when King Leopold II assumed the throne and set his sight on Africa. In his young age, no one ever knew or suggested that Leopold would one day become a mass murderer. He spent all his youthful days doing all of the things expected of a European prince before ascending the throne. He rode and shot, partook in state ceremonies, got appointments in the army, and got married to an Austrian princess by name Mary Henriette, who died in 19002. Then he got married again, this time to a French lady, Caroline Lacroix. In 1865, when Leopold seized the throne, he ruled with all the tenderness Belgians expected from their king in the wake of multiple reforms and revolutions that had democratized the country in the previous years. Indeed, the young King Leopold really only ever put pressure on the Senate in his attempts to get Belgium involved in constructing an overseas empire, like all other big powers. As time went by, his love for acquiring territories overseas grew gradually, and he decided to take a first action in 1866. King Leopold tried getting Philippines from Queen Isabella II of Spain, but his negotiation failed, with the overthrow of the Queen 2 years later. King Leopold's attention turns towards Africa. In 1878, Henry Stanley presumed to meet Dr. Livingstone deep inside the Congo rainforest. The international press made both men out to be heroes and bold explorers in the heart of darkest Africa. They carried out expeditions in the Congo. Meanwhile, a few years before these two men met, King Leopold had formed the International African Society to organize and finance exploration of the whole of Africa. Stanley and Livingstone's expeditions composed a major part of opening the rainforest to the king's agents, and the king's claim to the ironically named Congo Free State was formally recognized at the 1885 Berlin Congress. Historians say, as a fairly observant Catholic, King Leopold did not want to introduce his new chattel to Jesus. He did all these in the most literal and ruthless way possible by killing a huge number of them and making life very difficult for the rest, as they toiled to dig up gold, hunted to kill elephants for ivory, and hacked down their native forest to clear land for rubber plantations all over the country. The world's largest plantation was 76 times the size of Belgium, possessed rich mineral and agricultural resources, and had lost perhaps half of its population by the time the first census was counted. The Belgian government gave the king all the aid he needed to exploit the Congo. During the 25 years that the Congo Free State existed, it set a new standard for cruelty that horrified even the older imperial powers of Europe. The greed of Congo's overlords knew no boundaries, and the lengths to which they went to gratify it were likewise very high. Just as Christopher Columbus had done in Hispaniola 400 years earlier, Leopold II imposed quotas on every man in his realm for production of raw materials. Those who failed to meet their ivory and gold quota, even once, would face mutilation, with hands and feet being the most popular sites for amputation. Congo's horrors overheard. As time went by, news of King Leopold's harsh rule in Africa spread across other parts of the world. People had also started rallying against similar practices in the United States, Britain, and the Netherlands, all of which coincidentally owned large rubber plantations and were in competition with Belgium. By 1908, King Leopold had no choice but to cede his land to the Belgian government. The government, in turn, introduced some cosmetic reforms that technically and randomly killed Congolese civilians. When they were a little satisfied, they changed the colony's name to Belgian Congo. Belgian Congo remained under the shackles of colonial rule until independence in 1971. That is what transpired in Africa some years back, and there is even more to add to King Leopold's story in the Congo. Now the point is, why isn't King Leopold II as reviled or scolded as Stalin or Hitler? There are often mixed feelings whenever this issue of King Leopold, Hitler, or Stalin has been raised. To some people, King Leopold II was an innocent man who was attributed several crimes and was only berated by American and British media. King Leopold is not reviled like Hitler or Stalin because his oppression, exploitation, and arbitrary murder was imposed on non-Europeans. If you visit Brussels, you will find statues and sculptures of him everywhere. Europeans revile those who impose oppression, exploitation, and arbitrary murder against their European folk. It is also observed that King Leopold's crimes against humanity happened some 150 years ago, whereas Hitler and Stalin's came at the time of our grandparents, when radio and video recorders took the after effects. And unfortunately, as I earlier mentioned, there is an obvious explanation why Hitler and Stalin are more notorious. Their victims were white Europeans. Leopold's were black Africans, and people do not care as much about black deaths. King Leopold II of Belgium is considered by many to be one of the most brutal colonial leaders in history, responsible for the deaths of many people in the Congo. However, his crimes were not as widely known or acknowledged during his lifetime as those of Stalin or Hitler, and Belgium's role in the Congo was not as well publicized as other European colonial powers. Again, Leopold's regime was not very systematic in its oppression and extermination as those of Stalin or Hitler. The horrors of the Congo were backed mainly by economic drives, and that is nothing special in human history compared to the misery and cruelty that were inflicted on people for millennia in the pursuit of power and profit. Evil is evil, and nothing can cancel the fact. Hitler's Nazi Holocaust killed more than 6 million European Jews and at least 5 million prisoners of war. Stalin, on the other hand, with his Soviet policies, was responsible for the murder of at least 9 million people, whose deaths were caused by deportation, starvation, and incarceration in concentration camps. Looking at King Leopold's regime, at least 10 million people lost their lives. Come to think of it and find out for yourself which of these leaders are to be reviled. Hitler and Stalin, who were seen as two sides of the same coin, or King Leopold II. While King Leopold's actions were certainly deplorable, it is important to note that the historical context and the level of public awareness at the time play an important role in how individuals and events are remembered and perceived. We hope you enjoyed watching this video and have learned a thing or two for your general knowledge. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe to the New Tourist channel. Then turn on the notification button so that you don't miss out any of our videos. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.